Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to add my voice and my own sentiments to this resolution, to this debate, and certainly to the words of the Honourable Member, the Honourable Prime Minister, who led. I rise, sir, to join in paying tribute to a man that this nation, and in fact the world, has spent the last weeks mourning and at once celebrating in equal measure. The Right Excellent Sir Garfield St. Auburn Sobers, National Hero of Barbados. Sir, much has already been said, and much more will be said today and on other days about Sir Gary the cricketer. The records will be recited again: 365 not out, 6 sixes in an over, 93 tests, 235 wickets, and, sir, a captaincy that changed how the world saw us. Those records, sir, deserve to be recited. They are extraordinary, and I do not diminish them by choosing not to dwell on them today. But, sir, I want to use my contribution this morning to speak about Sir Gary not primarily as a sportsman, but, sir, as a case study, the clearest one this country has ever produced in what happens when a nation's poorest and most overlooked children are given a genuine chance. Because that, Mr. Speaker, is the actual story of his life. And I believe it is the tribute that he would want me to share with this House. Sir, let me say plainly at the outset that I never had the privilege of watching Sir Gary bat in his pomp. I belong to a generation for whom his batting lives only in grainy footage and in the stories older Barbadians still tell. My grandmother was one of them. With exactly the same reverence every single time, as though the innings happened yesterday. But not having seen him play, sir, never once diminished my admiration for him. Because cricket has never been a distant thing to me. I have followed the game closely my whole life, taught by that same grandmother. One of the things a lot of Barbadians do not realize is that women of a certain generation, with the radios next to their ear as they moved about the house and the yard, women of a certain generation were actually the ones that passed on love of cricket to their future generations. And so I had that privilege. My father's mother, and then my father, encouraged in me a love of the game. So I followed it closely my whole life, the way so many Barbadians do, as something close to a second faith. And I had something better still than having watched him play. I knew him as his Member of Parliament, and if I'm being honest, simply as an admirer of what he represented. I made it my business, and I had the pleasure of being invited to visit him on his birthday and on other occasions in the year that mattered to him and to St. Michael South Central. I'm not going to pretend, sir, that those visits were anything other than what they were, a privilege. To sit with a man who had done what he had done, and to find him on each occasion gracious and unfailingly interested in the people and the place around him. And that is something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. While I had the pleasure of hearing firsthand some of Sir Gary's cricket stories, later on, I also found that he was less eager to talk about those things and more eager to talk about me, to talk about the community. He would ask me, how are the rest treating you? And he was making reference to some of his friends and my own colleagues in this honorable place. And he would want to know how I was getting on in the business of service to the people of this country. But, sir, let me start my tribute where his story starts, and where mine, in a sense, meets his. Sir Gary was born in Bridgetown in 1936, one of 6 children, and we know the story of the loss that his family experienced early on, of Shimon and Thelma Sobers. Now, he grew up, as we know, in St. Michael South in the Bayland, which is the constituency next to my own. And when he was 5 years old, his father, a seaman serving with the Canadian Merchant Navy, was killed when his ship was torpedoed during the Second World War. And Thelma Sobers was left to raise those children alone in wartime Barbados on a working woman's means, on a working class family's means, I should say. And I asked this house to sit with that for a moment. The greatest cricketer the world has ever produced began his life as a fatherless boy in a large working class household. Precisely the child that our systems, then and now, are most likely to overlook. But Sir Gary was from the start multi-talented. He played basketball, he played table tennis, and at just 15 years old, he was a goalkeeper for Notre Dame Football Club. Good enough, by his own account, to go an entire season without conceding a single goal. That is the story that he tells. I share that detail deliberately, Mr. Speaker, because it matters to the story that I want to tell as I pay this tribute today. This was not a child who drifted into cricket for lack of anything else to do. He was already exceptional at other sports, and in the case of football, at another sport entirely. So why cricket? The official accounts many of us have read in the tributes these past weeks tell us that a severe leg injury ended his football career and turned him toward cricket. That may well be part of the truth, but it is not the whole truth, and I think that Sir Gary deserves the last word on his own life. He tells us that it was not an injury, but a choice. And he tells us that cricket offered him something football at that time did not. And that was a chance to explore the world, to travel far beyond these shores. That was a young man's calculation about where a poor Barbadian boy's talent could actually take him. And it turned out to be exactly right. But Mr. Speaker, here's the part of that same conversation that I consider the most important thing that Sir Gary has ever said publicly about his own life. More important in some ways than any score he has ever made. He did not tell us that he rose through sheer individual brilliance alone. He told us about the people who put him in a position to be seen. Sir Gary spoke of a groundsman named Frank, who used to carry him around on his bicycle to different grounds so that the young Sobers could get a game. He spoke of a Captain Farmer who enrolled him in the police band, not because Sir Gary had any particular gift for music, but because band membership was the door that let him play for the police cricket team, a stronger standard of cricket than a poor boy from St. Michael South could otherwise have reached. And he credited Sir Captain Farmer, alongside the former West Indies captain Dennis Atkinson, with opening the doors that eventually carried him to the highest level of the game. Mr. Speaker, that is the whole argument that as a part of this tribute I want to make to this House today, and I make it deliberately as a part of this tribute in the shadow of his memory. Frank, the groundsman, did not have institutional power. He had a bicycle and the will to use it. Captain Farmer didn't have a formal pathway for Sir Gary. He didn't have a formal pathway to offer a talented poor child. None existed. So he built one that he improvised through the police band because he refused to let that talent go to waste. And if you hear Sir Gary tell the story, he talks about how he used to play around with the bugle. He just used to pretend to blow it, to show up at practice and make it look as if he was doing something, because being a part of that police band was his doorway to the game that he loved. But sir, there is a more precise way still to understand what he was up against in those days. And it is not only his own memory that tells us so. For most of the 20th century, the established route into top-level Barbadian and West Indies cricket ran through a small number of elite secondary schools. Harrison College, Combermere, and the Lodge School chief among them. And those schools' cricket programs, coaching, and let us call it out, those schools' old boys networks, fed directly into the island's leading clubs. And if I recall, I believe that not only did those schools have Division I teams, but you would find that the Combermere boys would end up with Empire, Harrison College might end up at Spartan, and so that path was automatically created. This is documented history. And those of us who study the game carefully would know that it is the subject of a full academic study, Keith Sandiford's Cricket Nurseries of Colonial Barbados, that covers precisely the years of Sir Gary's rise. In that same conversation where Sir Gary tells us about this, he says plainly that he did not have Harrison College and Combermere behind him the way others of his era did. He didn't have that gate, but he had Frank's bicycle and he had Captain Farmer's police band. But sir, while we are thankful for those avenues, we know that a nation can't build its future on happening to be fortunate. Mr. Speaker, talent is distributed evenly across this island, across every parish, across working class communities, and other kinds of communities. But opportunity is not. What Frank and Captain Farmer did for Gary Sobers by instinct and by generosity and by improvisation, this government, our government, this parliament has a duty to do systematically and as a matter of policy for every child in Barbados today who has that same talent, but who does not today have that visibility. That means investment in community level sport. I re-emphasize this at every opportunity, because the only way that we can have national teams and national players in anything is if they emerge at the community level. So investment in community level sport, in scouting and in identification, in transport and equipment for children whose families cannot provide them, and in structured pathways from the playing field to the national program that do not today have to depend on a groundsman's bicycle or on an officer's goodwill. I want to emphasize at this point, though, sir, that there will always be a need for the Franks and the Captain Farmers. There will always be a role for them to help young people along and to have relationships with all of us that are not structured and not formal. But it is also the responsibility of a government to be able to support and encourage those pathways. That isn't sentiment, Mr. Speaker, that is the literal stated lesson of Sir Gary Sobers' own account of his own rise. But sir, it goes further than sport. If a boy of Sir Gary's gifts could be shut out of the very schooling that produced his era's other great cricketers, we will then have to ask ourselves how many other gifts this country has shut out the same way over the years. In mathematics, in science, in the arts, in leadership, simply because a child's family could not open the right school door. And that is precisely the gap the education reform now underway in this country is meant to close. And Sir Gary's own account of his life is as strong a piece of evidence as this House will ever hear for why we will not tire in that work and why that work must be finished. From there, the record does speak for itself, sir, although it deserves more than a passing mention, and I will go quickly through this. He joined club cricket at 13. He made his first class debut at 16. He played his first test for the West Indies at 17. Not yet as a batsman the world would come to know him as, but as a promising young left-arm spin bowler. So Gary will tell you how he started out at number 9 or number 7 in the batting order. So he came as a promising young left-arm spin bowler. And within a few short years, he had become something the sport has never seen before or since. At just 21 years old, against Pakistan in 1958, he scored 365 runs without being dismissed, breaking a test record that has stood since 1938. And that record, as we know, was held by England's own Len Hutton, a record set before the Second World War. Broken 20 years later by a boy from the Bayland. He remains to this day the youngest man ever to hold that record. He was at once a bowler across 3 distinct disciplines. And I will not be distracted into analyzing the state of bowling in cricket today. But Sir Gary was a bowler at once across 3 disciplines. He was orthodox spin, wrist spin and googlies, and genuine fast medium pace. And one of the finest slip fielders of his generation, sir, a complete cricketer in a way the game has never produced before or since. And then in 1968, playing a county match for Nottinghamshire against Glamorgan, he did something no batsman in the history of the sport had ever done. 6 balls in a single over, 6 sixes, 36 runs, gone in under 2 minutes. It had never been done before him. It stood alone and matched for decades after. Sir Gary captained the West Indies from 1965 to 1972, succeeding the great Frank Worrell. And he talks about how it felt for him to be called to Jamaica that first time and to look around and see Sir Frank Worrell and others around him. And you'll hear him say in conversations or in interviews that he has done that he looked around himself and he said to himself, "Ah, boy, you made it." But he succeeded Frank Worrell, the first man to hold that captaincy on a permanent footing rather than as a concession. And those years ran almost exactly alongside this region's own political awakening. Barbados itself gained independence in 1966 in the very middle of Sir Gary's captaincy. And I want us to appreciate the importance of that moment. And so Sir Gary's first series in charge saw West Indies beat Australia for the first time in our history, reclaiming the Frank Worrell Trophy in front of a world that had never before had to take us that seriously. And sir, you know, the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, the Honourable Prime Minister who spoke before me, talked about how if you weren't pretending to be Sir Gary, you weren't doing anything. The fact is that there are other generations for which Sir Gary, who did not grow up watching Sir Gary. But he was always a presence in our homes and in our lives. My father is a church man. Most of what he sings are hymns, walking around the house. But he would always be singing that Sparrow song, "Australia lost, the West Indies is boss, the trophy belongs to us." And the pride that he felt, and every time Australia lost, he sang it, even when it didn't lose against the West Indies. Because that was how Barbadians felt about that record, about that moment. So at that time, the West Indies cricket team was, and remains, a single side drawn from many separate nations across this region. And during that era, sir, it became one of the first institutions on earth where the Caribbean region proved undeniably, on a stage the old empire itself had built and cared about more than anything else it possessed, that we were not lesser, not in application, not in intellect, not in courage, and not in class. Sir Gary, as the finest player the game has ever produced, was that proof in its most complete and undeniable form. Sir, the honors that followed his knighthood in 1975, presented in person by Queen Elizabeth II during a royal visit to an already independent Barbados, his naming by an act of this very Parliament in 1998 as one of only 11 national heroes of Barbados at the time, were simply the institutions catching up. was simply those institutions catching up to what the people of this country had already known for a generation. This House has made this judgment about Sir Gary once before. Today is not a new claim on his behalf. It is a continuation of one that this Parliament has already settled. Mr. Speaker, before I move toward a close, I want to speak about something I don't know has been said in the midst of all of the tributes of the last couple weeks. And that is what Sir Gary made possible for those who came after him. People who mean as much to me personally as a lifelong follower of the game as he came to mean to this House as a national hero. Consider Malcolm Marshall, also a son of St. Michael, and by the judgment of most who watched him, and some of my colleagues in this chamber all know how I feel about the game and the legacy of Malcolm Marshall. But by the judgment of most who watched him, the greatest fast bowler this game has ever produced. His father, a policeman, was killed in a road accident when Malcolm was still a baby. And like Sir Gary, he was raised in a working household by his mother and his grandfather, without the connections that came with privilege. Malcolm Marshall terrorized the finest batsmen on earth for the better part of 2 decades. In West Indies sides that the whole cricketing world just assumed by then to be the best in it. That assumption was not always there, sir. Sir Gary's generation had to fight, series by series, to establish it. Malcolm Marshall's generation inherited it and only had to defend it. That is not a small thing to hand down to a boy from St. Michael coming after you. Sir Gary did not simply play brilliant cricket, Mr. Speaker. He built the ground that the next boy from St. Michael and other generations could stand on. And the line runs, sir, all the way down to the team that represents us today. Shea Hope, our current one-day international and T20 captain, a Barbadian wicketkeeper batsman with more than 150 caps for West Indies and closing in on 20 centuries in that format, plays a version of this game that exists in real part because Sir Gary first made the world take West Indian cricket seriously enough to build something that would be worth inheriting. I want to place something on record here, sir. I'm sure many of us have seen it. 2 days after Sir Gary passed, on the 20th of July, West Indies met New Zealand in a one-day international at the Kensington Oval, the very ground that bears the Sir Garfield Sobers Pavilion, the very ground where he made his name. Both of the teams wore black armbands. Both sides stood for a minute's silence before a ball was bowled. And West Indies came desperately close to winning that match for him, falling agonizingly short by a single wicket, and I could still feel the pain in my bowels, sir. Afterwards, Shea Hope did not speak first about the defeat. He said, and I quote, "Unfortunately, we couldn't get that win for the great man." Mr. Speaker, that is a quote from a young Barbadian cricketer born 19 years after Sir Gary had already retired from the game, telling the country, without being asked, that he still felt like he owed Sir Gary something on the very ground where it all began. The thread runs, sir. I never saw Sir Gary bat in person, Mr. Speaker, but I've watched Shea Hope bat more times than I can count, and I've admired Malcolm Marshall's bowling more times than I can count besides. That, I would suggest to this House, is what a legacy actually looks like. Not a pavilion alone, we have that too, and we have other markers of his legacy. But a living, breathing sense of debt and gratitude felt by men and women who never saw him play either, carried forward onto the very soil where he first carried it himself. Mr. Speaker, when Sir Gary left us, it felt like an almost palpable withdrawal of greatness and love and care and friendship and all the other things many of us enjoyed from this earth. And so that line, from Sir Gary to those like Malcolm Marshall, to those like Shea Hope, does not run through the men's game alone. Hayley Matthews is also a constituent of St. Michael's South Central, just as Sir Gary himself became. Before she was ever a cricketer, she was a javelin thrower good enough to win gold at the Carifta Games. Another gifted Barbadian, forced like Sir Gary with his football to choose between two sports she excelled at. And like him, she chose cricket. Today, Hayley Matthews stands at the very top of the world game. The #1 ranked women's T20 all-rounder on the planet, the ICC's own Cricketer of the Year, and captain of the West Indies women's team. When my constituents point with pride at Sir Gary's memory, as they often do, many of them are in the very same breath pointing at Hayley Matthews' training on those same grounds today. It's not a coincidence that I take lightly, Mr. Speaker, and I do not think this House or this country should either. The door that Sir Gary forced open all those years ago did not stay open for men's cricket alone. And that is real progress, and that is real legacy. That door stayed open long enough, sir, and wide enough for the women's game to walk through it too. And St. Michael's South Central has now given this country both ends of that story. In his later years, sir, Sir Gary's great sporting passion became golf, pursued with the same relentless appetite for mastery that had carried him through every discipline before it. And eventually, the cricket stories became golf stories for those of us who would talk with him. And when his playing days were done, and the whole world was genuinely open to him, he came home. He chose to live not merely in Barbados, but specifically in St. Michael's South Central. He grew up next door in St. Michael's South, became a global icon, and then, in the fullness of his fame, chose to spend his later years among the very people I have the honor to represent in this House. I knew him, my constituents knew him, not as a legend at a distance, but as a neighbor. It is an honor, sir, to make this presentation in tribute to Sir Gary, and it is my duty as his Member of Parliament to be able to rise to make it in a unique way that acknowledges him as a member of our community and that acknowledges his family, Matthew, Daniel, Genevieve, Cecil, his brother, and grandchildren and other members of his family, that acknowledges his family as part of our community. You know, when people called in the wake of his passing, and I say this because I haven't said this through you, Sir Daniel, to you before, but many constituents and members of the community had such concern for the family, feeling as if you were part of us, and feeling as if Sir Gary was being fully embraced, and constituents of St. Michael's South Central feel special. They feel, oh, okay, yes, y'all can have him, but he is from our community. And that is something that they made very clear and they feel very proud of. And they also feel, as I do, that it must have been quite a sacrifice, and we take it quite as a gift for him to have been given by you to the country and to the world. That level of performance and service, and to hear Sir Gary talk about how it was never about him, it was always about whomever he was representing, his country, the West Indies, even a club. That calls for quite a bit of sacrifice and to be on that journey with him, and we thank you for that. Mr. Speaker, the tribute that this House owes to Sir Gary's memory is not only ceremonial, it's not only a matter of moving of emotion or the observing of a moment's silence, however deserved. The real tribute is to keep open and to widen deliberately as policy the door that a groundsman's bicycle and a police captain's improvisation through a police band once held open for a young boy from the Bayland. Every child in this country with that same talent deserves better than to depend on the same luck that he depended on. And we hold that challenge as a parliament, as a government, central to our policy and to everything that we do. We hold the commitment, just like Frank did, and just like that police captain did, to be able to see people that would otherwise not be seen, and to develop policy for them and to develop programs for them. So Gary didn't inherit opportunity. It was created for him by people who chose to see him. And he spent the rest of his life proving that that trust was not misplaced, and then passing it forward in the whispers to other players, as you heard the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast make reference to. And then whether he ever meant it to or not, pass it forward in legacy to Marshall, to Hope, to Matthews, and to every Barbadian cricketer or athlete or musician or anybody else bearing a talent. This Parliament and this nation now owe the same act of creation to whomever comes next. Wherever in Barbados that child is growing up today, not yet seen. Rest well, Sir Gary. Barbados, the Caribbean, and the world are larger because you passed through them. And St. Michael South Central was fortunate enough in the end to be the place that you called home. And somewhere on a school ground in this country today, unseen, is the next Marshall or the next Hope or the next Matthews or the next Sir Gary, waiting only for a Frank, a Captain Farmer, or this Parliament to notice. And I call on us all to let it be us that notices and that keeps that door open. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged to you.